Bonjour everybody, welcome back to my studio. Today we're going to have a look at a past grade that I did, and this grade was actually quite interesting as the camera originals came out like this, very pink magenta, quite a strong color wash, and we changed it up to that, and I'm going to show you my step-by-step approach that led to that result. Without further ado, let's dive in. Welcome back into Resolve. I'm going to show you how the images came up and the step-by-step approach that we've been through to obtain that result. The camera used for that project was a Panasonic camera. It was shot in V-Log, V-Gamut, and I'm input mapping with a CST my Panasonic V-Log into Davinci wide gamut because I am always working in that space most of the time, so I'm converting my cameras into that space because I like how the grading tools feel in that space. So I'm converting my camera basically into Davinci wide gamut, and then downstream I've got my output transform OT, which is that node, and it's transforming my Davinci wide gamut, Davinci intermediate into Rec 709 gamma 2.4, okay? And now if I disable all that stack, okay, that's the starting point we basically worked with. So you see that if I look at the vector scope, and obviously if you use your own eyes to look at the footage, right, it looks very, very reddish magenta. So our goal is going to basically offset that, because sometimes when you work with some footage, there could be some problems in the shoot, and you as a colorist are here in order to troubleshoot some of these problems and make the project shine at the end of the day. So that's what we tried doing here. When I'm seeing such a strong color wash, I'm having a discussion with the filmmakers in order to ask them, okay, was this intentional? What are you trying to achieve? And so on. And in that case, it was more of a problem in the shoot. I don't really remember like the specifics, but the goal was to actually salvage that. And the thing is that when I look at my parade, you see that the green channel has like almost no data in it. So obviously it's going to be really challenging to salvage that. What I can do is to use some Davinci Resolve native tools and try to offset that temperature basically. So I'm going into my HDR tools right here, and you see my global wheel. So if I go into that compound node, and you see that that dot is all the way to the grain side, right? So that's before, that's after. I'm trying to just literally compensate that adjustment, and I'm maxing this adjustment out, okay? So with that operator, I just cannot go further into like the green direction in order to compensate for that magenta-ish tint. And you see that the vector scope, it's going from all the way to this big spike, reddish magenta spike, into something a little bit more to the warm yellow kind of side. And I'm using a second temperature adjustment in order to nudge it a little bit greener basically. And I've just created a compound node with those two adjustments. So to create a compound node, you basically, I'm going to show you, you grab the two nodes, okay, you want to stick in a compound node, right click and go create compound node. And I'm labeling this node temp, okay, because I'm doing a massive swing in temperature. So as before, it's after. once we've done that, the thing is, okay, now we're quite underexposed, because could be a lack of light, could be because that green channel was like so very little stimulated that we're gonna have to offset that basically drop in exposure with some other adjustments. So basically you see that it was a lot brighter here than it is here, okay, kind of. So we're gonna have to compensate for that. And upstream of that adjustment, I have used my HDR global wheel again, which is right here, and you see that I'm basically raising my overall exposure of like 1/3 of a stop, basically, okay? So I'm using that, and I highly recommend to use the HDR global wheels when you want to change exposure, especially a big drastic change of exposure, because it's going to work in the native transfer function, basically, of the color space you're working in my case, to Davinci wide gamut, and it's going to really help give you a clean boost in exposure. So that's what I'm using right there. Overall, I mean, upstream of that, I decided to do like a gain adjustment. So that is in my primary wheels. I'm using the gain. Let's switch to the rings so you're a bit more familiar with that representation. So see, I'm basically using gain in order to bump and give a bit more energy into the signal, because by the time we did that huge temperature adjustment, it has killed quite a bit of energy in the signal. So I'm trying to compensate a little bit for that. And now if I select those 3 nodes, okay, so that's before, that's after, we've come a long way, but the image still looks a little bit dull, and we have still a lot to do in order to get to our final stage, okay? So before, after, let's keep going. So what else did we do? We did a contrast adjustment. So it's basically using my RGB curve. So that's before and it's after, before, after. Just trying to gain a little bit of like compression in the shadows and roll off a little bit in order to give it a bit more of a filmy feel, especially as like the shadows sort of like rendered a bit noisy with all the big changes that we did with the signal. Actually, on the bottom end, it's quite noisy and it's like on the verge of like tearing a little bit. So like having that nice compression in the shadows is sort of like helping us clean our render a little bit. So I'm quite a fan of that. So from there, I played with the color crosstalk, which basically in Resolve is called the RGB Mixer, and it's kind of like redistributing the amount of red, green, and blue into my red, green, and blue channel respectively. So here you see that I can change the amount of red in my red channel, the amount of green in my red channel, the amount of blue in my red channel, and here the amount of red in my green channel, green in my green channel, blue in my green channel, etc. So it's allowing to really cleanly remap how these channels are like distributing. And I like to play with this tool sometimes, especially when I'm having like difficult raw media, and also in general to kind of compress some tonal range as well. So here it's basically like warming a little bit my image, but it's doing some really nice things, especially when I have all the pieces together. And the thing is, when I built this grade, it was not really in that specific order. For example, I would tweak the temperature a little bit or the exposure, and then go to the RGB mixer, tweak a different node, and then go back and forth. And this is how you reach a place that you really, really like with the filmmakers. And that's what's important. I mean, at least that's how I like to operate. So in that RGB Mixer node, I'm getting some results that you might not really like, at least we might not really like them yet. The thing is, when I compensate or play it against with the temperature, for example, now these two nodes are helping getting a bit more life into that image. And in that temperature node, it's again, I think it's the HDR global wheel, so I'm changing the temperature here. And now we are getting somewhere, I think. So again, that's before, that's where we are now. So when I reached that sort of point, and we were with the filmmakers here, and it was, okay, we started to get somewhere now. And I played a little bit with the split toning, so sometimes I like to separate my highs and lows. So I would, for example, cool the shadows a little bit. Here I'm injecting some cyans in the shadows. So when you subtract red, so when I drop that curve right here, I am injecting some cyans in my image. See? Before, after, okay? So I'm gonna hit undo a couple times, yeah. So here I'm just doing it by eye and just until we land somewhere that feels nice. So that's before, that's after. And it's helping our character separate a little bit in the scene. It has a little bit more of a 3D sort of like rendering, which is nice. But then in my split high, this is where I've added a little bit of warmth in the upper end of my tone scale. So basically my highlights would feel a little bit warmer, okay? So it's actually a little bit faint here, but I can feel it. So here, when you subtract some blue, you're adding some yellows in the highlights. Here, when you drop this blue control point, I'm gonna add some yellow in my highlights. I'm gonna make these highlights feel warmer. Okay, so that's with the blue channel, and if I push a little bit of red, I'm gonna add some reds in the highlights as well. You can also play with the green curve if you want, so you can add some green, subtract some green in the highlights, etc. So that's something I like to play with. And okay, so now it's okay, we're really happy with that result. And if I select all these nodes, before, after, now it looks really, really nice. And obviously we want to have a look at the overall photography and see how it sort of like, you know, plays out, because the point is that I haven't really done this with you up till now, but when we built that look, we were looking at all the shots in the timeline basically, and I see that, okay, from there to here, there to here, it's looking a lot better. And we've done some really nice work from this 10-bit log vlog file basically. So we're quite happy at that point. I'm gonna, I don't know, have a look to all the clips, go back to the first one, and what did we do? Added a bit of density and just as well sort of like recovered a bit of shadows as well, shadow detail overall, and played with texture to give it like a nice grain sort of texture. Like if I like zoom in here, disable the texture, so that's off, that's on, off, on, So that's before, that's after. So quite a drastic before and after, guys, right? And I just wanted to show you that, okay, with Resolve native tools, you can achieve some fantastic looks. There's a lot of plugins out there, and some of these are really good. Some of these are not so good. And to be honest with you, if you take your time to actually know your Resolve native tools, you can achieve some fantastic looks. And that filmic look, okay, here, it's basically built from scratch by hand. And the thing is, when you use a LUT, there's some components of that LUT that you might not like. The thing is, if you build your own look from scratch, then you can have control over each block, and it's much more allowing you freedom. And this is what I like, okay? So me personally, when I want to achieve a filmic look, I might want to use a LUT, that's okay. But I know that I don't depend on LUTs in order to build a nice look. And this is something that I find important when you're grading. All right, guys, well, that's it for today. I hope that you enjoyed this episode. Please leave a like, comment down below and let me know what you thought about it. Subscribe to the channel to not miss the future updates I'll be making. And I will be seeing you in the next one. And don't forget to follow me on Instagram as well. Salut, prenez soin de vous.